Hello everyone, I'm Portia King, and on behalf of the Chicago Department of Public Health, we welcome you to this important conversation to address concerns surrounding the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic specific to women of color in our communities. The Chicago Department of Public Health has been continuously working to provide the best access and information to Chicago communities about the importance of the COVID-19 vaccine, not only to protect ourselves, but to protect those around us as well. With the news and social media overload with information and misinformation, women are choosing to take a wellness break at our local nail salon and pamper themselves through self-care and relaxation. Today, we are at the beautiful That Color Nails, the perfect place to unwind and chat about the issues that impact us. We are here to address concerns around women's health as it relates to the COVID-19 vaccine. Before we start the conversation, I would like to introduce you to our very special guest. First, we have fashion and beauty influencer, Lauren King. Lauren is a well-respected beauty influencer who is doing amazing work behind the scenes to create more conversations surrounding health and self-care. Hey, Lauren.
Hey.
Up next, we have Tanya Lasano, the owner of Healthy Hood Chicago, a community-based nonprofit organization to help communities survive and strive by providing programs that help others to focus on mental and physical wellness to create a stronger future. Hey. And last, but certainly not least, here to help debunk myths and misinformation and share facts on the COVID-19 vaccine and why it is so important, we have the Medical Director of Behavioral Health for the Chicago Department of Public Health, Dr. Wilnice Jasmine.
Glad to be here.
Hello. So welcome everyone, and we appreciate your time to sit down with us today. Now, let's talk about it. All right, ladies. So as we continue to live in this new normal, why is it so important to incorporate self-care into your daily routines?
Because it's stressful right now, and you have to really kind of tune in differently with your mental health and also with your body. You have to listen different to what your body and your mind is saying, I need, versus ignoring it. Because we're so isolated in a sense from what life was like pre-COVID. So I think now it's just we have to really hone in on what our body is telling us. I think that's one big thing. At least for me, that's what it is.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tanya, what do you think?
Yeah, I think self-care is a part of community care, and you can't take care of your community or your family if you're a mother unless you take care of yourself. And even before COVID, I feel like it was stressful to be a mom, to hold things down, just to be a woman in a patriarchal society or a capitalistic society. It's just hard. And on top of that, if you're a woman of color, it's even harder. So it's revolutionary, really, to practice self-care as a woman.
All right, and how about you, Dr. Jasmine?
Well, you mentioned one role that many women play is of mother. I'll brought it in to say we often are caregivers, whether we recognize it or unofficially or officially, we are caregivers. So I think the more time we're able to pour into ourselves, the more time we'd be able to be there for those we care about.
That's right. For sure. Yeah, and that's a great transition into the next question, which is, how has the pandemic and everything affected your family and friends? Like, so not just you, but everyone.
The isolation was hard, especially because we were in a state of the unknown, not knowing if I touched a piece of fruit, was I going to get sick? Or if I left the house, what was going to happen? So I know for not just myself, but a lot of my friends who are like, this interaction is everything they need, And I specifically know, like, I have had family members, and I have family members that have mental health issues, that this in itself was just hard for them. And those who never was diagnosed with it, it was hard. So I think that interaction, that people-to-people interaction, that was hard. But also not being able to see my family. I'm almost 30 years old. I have never had a moment that I couldn't touch my grandparents. We did a drive-by, and I was fine. until I saw them from like 15 feet and I lost it because I was like, you mean I can't go hug them? So that was tough. So I think that it just mentally took a toll on everybody, including myself that I knew, and just the fear of the unknown.
And you talking on that just reminds me of something, and I think of the This Is Us episode. I don't know if you all watched that show, but there was an episode where they usually show this pre-story and you don't know where it's leading, but the story pretty much went into the guy or the doctor or scientist who created FaceTime.
Oh, wow.
Or created the ability to send photos over like digitally.
Yeah.
So just thinking about how that plays into it. So was technology useful as far as like getting through it or helping? Because could you have imagined if this was the 1918 situation?
Oh my goodness, I
and
couldn't.
where you didn't even have that.
I couldn't imagine it because FaceTime was a part of my survival, and being able to connect with my friends. And we would watch the Versus challenges or, you know, all these different things. We were sitting here with our glasses of wine and tripods and stuff popped up, and we all and having dance parties in the living room. And it's just one person, but you feel like you have more than one person in a room. So technology actually, it helped a lot, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, so speaking of that isolated community, so can you touch on just what it was like, your friends and family, as well as everybody involved in your organization? How did you all stay together or stay uplifted throughout the time period?
I think beyond just the isolation, I feel like the isolation and the lockdown was just the very beginning, because the whole pandemic, we went through it was a process. We went through a lot of different phases, and from that isolation, technology was a huge part because it brought about a lot of realizations. Right, the isolation brought a lot of realizations, and it was technology that was kind of acting as that vessel, right, that was giving us the information, maybe information we already knew, but now it felt very magnified, right? Like it was people of color that were dying, it was people of color that were getting infected and didn't know where to go to get care or didn't know how to deal with it. I know for me and the Latino community, the undocumented community, really felt left out of all the relief, all the government relief. And so those realizations really started to click, and then in the midst of that we have this unrest because the assassination of our brother George Floyd happens, and all of these realizations happened for maybe some people that it was kind of flying under the radar because we're struggling to survive and we're in the midst of it, but now all of the systemic brokenness was just very real and very in your face. And I think for our community, what it did was it really pushed us into action, because we realized that the government relief wasn't going to reach our people, really never had in the first place. The healthcare system, the way that it exists now, never really was intended to include people of color. And so we really had to figure out how we were going to make it. And absolutely. And we had to figure out what resources we had amongst ourselves and how we were going to spread that around to survive, because we were in a state of survival mode, and so many of my members of my congregation, it's a mostly refugee church, so many people in my community had to deal with death, so much death in the community, and so I think that something clicked in a different way, because there was no other distraction, right? There was no other things going on. So it was like, oh wow, systemic racism and systemic oppression does exist, and now with this pandemic, it's magnified. And if we don't figure it out for ourselves, we're not going to figure it out. We're not going to survive.
And I think that was like secretly as bad as this pandemic is, I think that was the blessing and the curse, because just to touch on what you said, in a way, we had to figure out how to survive and create resources for ourselves, for us. So it was like we were given a gift to me from me, and me meaning from us to our communities, and trying to figure out how can we really try to navigate this, because we know that the system isn't really set up for us. We are already back against the wall in regards to resources, whether it be financial, health, education, like housing, so many things. And the gift in it was you got to see just how smart you really were, and not relying on someone else having to hand you a resource and say, oh, this is what you're supposed to do. We came a little bit more self-sufficient because we had to, and now you know there's nothing that you cannot do.
And speaking of like just being self-sufficient, and I think of that more so as a community, because speaking on all of the different riots and the looting that happened, it also exposed how critical a lot of these corner stores, local in our communities, or the one grocery store within miles, when it was no longer available, you literally had to rely on the community. Because went and volunteered at several organizations to like create food banks or just to provide toiletries for people, and just thinking about the small little things that you wouldn't have thought of needing. And some of those stores are just now opening up.
And it was so sad to see that.
Yeah. But I do want to swing it to Dr. Jasmine. So how are your friends and family affected?
Well, for a lot of my family, they live out of state, so it was hard not being able to go see them on a regular basis. That was the first time it was the longest stretch of time that I haven't been able to see them. Again, we mentioned technology. For the group of people that I trained with in residency, we had been saying for years that we wanted to meet up. And through Zoom, we finally got to do it during the pandemic. I think because the last time we were experiencing such stress was in residency, we reached out naturally to each other as a source of comfort. But then bringing technology again, just think about how in our society there is a digital divide. So when we had shelter in place, we thought about the children with how would they continue with their schooling. Not everyone has a tablet. So how do we know which children do not have tablets? How do we give them out, and how do we help them and their families get the internet connection so they can use a tablet to connect to their schools?
Right.
Yeah.
That the disparities were so magnified. When I say just not even technology, the fact that the shelter in place turned out to be a privilege for some, because for some of our families, we have so many generations living in one home. We have grandparents, aunties, kids, grandchildren, and they were, in the beginning they were saying keep the old people away from you and keep, separate, and it was just not a reality for us. It was not a possibility, and we just continue to see systemic oppression play out in such a crazy way. And I think, like you said, it really just like made us like figure it out. And also, like, I think it made us challenge this narrative that as communities of color that we lack so much. Like that's the narrative that is given to us, that we lack and we need to rely on the government and we need to do all of these things. But the truth is, what we found out is that we have all the skills, talent, medicine, herbs, all that within ourselves. In fact, we have an abundance. And so I think, again, like you said, it was a blessing and a curse at the same time. Absolutely. But in the end, we became a more organized people, and I think that's really what matters.
And now there's so many people depending on our communities to be really about that action. Like, look at what we did from so many just standpoints. Like, if it had not been for us, where would we be? And now, and I don't want to say all of a sudden, but all of a sudden, we are the go-to for it all, because we were able to figure it out through this pandemic with the lack thereof resources just across the board. Right. So now they're like, okay, so how can we be more like people of color?
Exactly. So sometimes, or what it did expose is that sometimes when you figure out you can't depend on anyone, you realize you have to depend on yourself. Awesome.